Thank you for tuning in to Growing Tech Fast, the condensed Org3D podcast in which conversations about growing tech startups are had with those who have grown them. Today, I'm joined by Aaron, Colin, C.O.O. and CCO at Shrapnel, an award-winning team who are building a AAA first-person shooter game on the blockchain. Aaron, Colin, thanks so much for joining me. I'd love to start by explaining who you both are and who Shrapnel is.
So, hello everybody, and thank you, Rosie. I'm Aaron Monis, I'm the COO, and I like to think that I basically deal with all things operational in the studio. My background is very much on both the game platform side of things, as well as media streaming platform. Most recently, before Shrapnel, I was running some of the teams over at HBO and their streaming product. And, we spun out a group from HBO to start up this company to make the next best thing that gaming has ever seen.
And I'm Colin Foran, I'm Chief Creative. My background sort of came up through concept art, art direction, creative direction, and now, the 1,000 hats that we have to wear for this. I'm currently head of game, so that means overseeing the art, design, and engineering that all need to work together to make something like this. And we can go into how those teams are created and sort of, how we're trying to build things out in sort of a slightly different way later. But it's basically making sure that all of those things are working together in a way to sort of run the ball down the field as far and as fast as we can. Before that, I was HBO as well. At the time we were trying to build out something that kind of looked like a game streaming division, like an HBO Games. And that allowed us to collect some very, very smart and very, very clever people together. Business circumstances sort of put that on hold. And, we just sort of decided what we had was sort of a lightning in a bottle scenario. So that was the team that really Aaron helped put together and that we decided to spin out to help create this thing. Before that, I was over at Microsoft Publishing. And that was sort of in that era. It was like a super, super cool time of like Xbox 360, Xbox LA, or Xbox, XBLA, into sort of that Connect era where we were just trying to experiment with new stuff, into game streaming, sort of like et cetera, et cetera. So my background's always had a little bit of create a story. They tend to be character-centric, mature stories, but there's always this weird little tip of the spear technology bit to it, right? So like whether that's a new console or VR or AR or what we're doing now with the blockchain, there's always that little bit of what's the best thing we can do plus. And I think that just, it helped attract a certain type of developer and a certain type of person. And now we're swimming in them in the studio. So.
Great. Well, Aaron, you put the team together. What was the reason behind bringing all these brilliant people and putting them in the one room?
Yeah, the original impetus was that there's some gaps in the industry, and at the time, the kind of biggest gap was really how do we tell game experiences the same way that movies and television tell stories to people, and when it starts getting into the interactive space with a lot of user agency, and you start. I've heard it said that building games is a lot like sending people to the moon. It's a level of complexity that takes some deep engineering, a marriage of science and art. The art staff, the design staff, the creative staff in games needs to have enough of a technical brain to really be thinking about how a simulation of the creative event can deal with the massive amounts of user agency that happens, and putting together that sort of like thought leadership in the wizards of that space to really be thinking about pushing experiences to the next level, and really embracing that sort of experience first mentality was what brought these folks together. And as Colin said, very specifically looking for people who don't have a creative vision and think about what technology can I use to enable it, and don't have a technology vision and think of what creative thing I can use to deliver it, but instead are thinking about what is the only way to deliver this technology plus this creative idea together in a way that when it's done, feels like you couldn't have done one without the other.
And what led you to branch away? You both worked for some big names there, and had what a lot of people would look at and say that they're two really impressive careers so far. So what made you take that step away?
Yeah, it begins with opportunity in the space. One of the other things that was a hallmark of all of the individuals I brought together was an entrepreneurial spirit, and it's married also with innovation. I think those two things do, to some extent, go hand in hand. Thinking about where's the gap in the market, what are we doing that has never been done before, the entrepreneurial spirit says, like, I want to own this, I want to drive it. I don't want to be a cog in another machine. I want to be the person who's like making this thing happen, top to bottom. And everybody that we had brought together prior that left was really in that same mindset, of, we've spent some time in these big companies. Certainly the big companies have a lot of capital to be able to experiment in sort of big and robust ways. But when you have an idea that's good enough and a team that's good enough, you can find that capital outside of those companies, you're kind of unsaddled with all of the difficulties that a big company brings in terms of needing to prove that you're bringing in billions of revenue as opposed to millions of revenue, and being able to grow something that feels small at the beginning and becomes large over time. When you're in a big corporation, you sort of have to start big, as opposed to starting small and growing big. And we just thought the idea was big enough in the end that we could start small, and build to it in a way that a big company wouldn't support.
Yeah. Okay, we've built it up enough. Can you tell us a bit more about Shrapnel and what you're building?
Yeah, for sure. So Shrapnel, the quick elevator pitch, AAA first-person extraction shooter built on blockchain. So for anybody not familiar with what that game type is, the extraction shooter, it's a game type where no one's winning by blowing each other up. That's more of a means to an end. It's about going in, finding items of value, and successfully extracting them, which is its own whole sort of like gameplay loop, right? So anything I bring in can potentially be lost, and anything that I find in there can be taken out and then sold elsewhere. The game itself is sort of one large spoke in this grand umbrella that we have of just this ecosystem that ties it all together. There's a lot of systems thinking on our team, like people that have built big, complicated things. And there's always this feeling that stuff is a little bit disparate, like you can tell where certain teams pick certain things up, and that's fine. That's just part of making big, complicated things. But one of the ambitions that we have for Shrapnel is that this entire ecosystem just has really meaningful connective tissue from one point to the next. So what I do in the game is sort of frictionlessly tied to a marketplace system that we're building out that gets fed by a UGC system that we're building, a user-generated content system that sort of continually refreshes the community with what the community wants because the community is making it, right? So, the aspiration that we have for it now, and, we can get into our crawl, walk, run later, but the idea is to, like, first and foremost, make a fun game, right? Like it was interesting to us that was sort of a unique take on this space when we were first starting off and first exploring, but we are not trying to find a way to mash things together, like a certain way to play a game and a certain technology. We want to make a fun game. We want to make a free-to-play game. Anybody comes in, hard stop, there's something for you. After you've done that, the hope is that maybe then we bring you over to UGC and we say, do you want to make your own livery, or do you want, remember how cool it was to make your own Unreal Tournament levels back in the day? We're going to make that super easy. And, it didn't need to be a big production. You could play it with your friends. They'd make fun of you, so you'd make changes. And then, months later, you have this really cool thing that you can play. That's awesome. And we want to get those people that might be a little bit reluctant to get into that space. afterwards, once that's done, and in my mind, when I think of that, that might be a 2 or 3 month journey, right? So someone's in the ecosystem, they're in it, they are starting to accumulate their own interest in it, right? Like we can't just tell someone to care about the stuff that we're making. They need to put in their time and put in their effort and start to grow and get cool at it, whatever. Once that's there, then I think that in a pretty unique way to the industry gives an interesting on-ramp into the blockchain space, right? So I think what a lot of that communication has suffered from up to this point is this is important, and if you don't get it, you're stupid. And if you tell me you're confused, I'm going to tell you you're stupid. We're taking an approach that says you're going to have a ton of fun, you're going to start to grow, you're playing with your friends. Like, you've been in this ecosystem for so long before you smell anything in the neighborhood of this big, weird, strange thing that you're not really sure of. And then when it behooves you to engage with it, we're going to make it as frictionless as possible. And the goal for that is, it's no highfalutin fiduciary instrument. It's you made a building, everybody's using your building, you should be able to pull that out and get a pizza with it. Hard stop. Like, no mustache twirling, nothing. If more people are playing with Aaron's building than mine, he should see a larger percentage of return on that, right? If I, don't really enjoy my experience anymore, I should be able to sell off what I have and just have that independent of what we've made. Then you can go off into another game ecosystem. For as much as people seem suspicious of that idea, it sort of really just sounds like game resale again, which, everybody was very pissed off to lose about, 8 years ago, but that conversation's long gone, I guess. But it's a place where you can play, a place where you can create, a place where you can experience the community, and then hopefully have a more meaning relationship with the marketplace than they've had elsewhere.
I love that idea. I think that regardless of whether you're a gamer or you're into art or whatever the forms that blockchain is starting to appear more and more often on, it is that way, that it feels like if you're not in that inner circle and you're not in that inner group, that you just shouldn't be in it, or that you don't know enough to get in there. I think it's really cool that you're finding a way to do this in an area which actually they probably do have a lot of people who understand what crypto is and are already in it and know what the blockchain is. But to offer that to everybody in such an inclusive way, and in a way which allows somebody to grow their knowledge as they're going, doing something that they really enjoy anyway.
Well, the goal is to make it as important too, because I think through no fault, of course you want to prioritize your experience, but in other competing titles, I think you see the game and then everything else. And it was really important for us to say, the player that comes in that loves making stickers or that loves like watching streams of people playing custom levels, like, they are absolutely as important as everyone else, and they have a place here. And the hope is that that helps make the things that they're into, thrive and be that much better, so that maybe a gamer that wasn't really used to UGC or used to making their own stuff is like, well, wow, that looks really cool. It doesn't seem like it's that hard. Like, let's give that a shot as well. And hopefully that just raises the water up on all these different cohorts that we're thinking about.
Can you tell us a little bit about where you are now, like in terms of development, where the product's sitting, and how you go about getting something like this off the ground and getting people using it?
Yeah, so this is kind of the interesting part for us. Like, a little while ago you asked, why are we doing it this way? And I think for me, it's a chance to evaluate and try a new process. Like, we've all shipped our games before. Like, we've shipped a game with a number at the end of it, and then a few years later, there's another number behind that one. Like, we've been in that space, and there's a very specific way to make those kinds of games. And I think we've experienced sort of some unnecessary frictions in this space, like, processes that you don't do because they're the right way to do it. You just do it because that's how you did it last time. And these are so big, and they're such scary productions, and so, difficult to pull off. Better to do it the wrong way and it ships than experiment with something else. I think we have a very rare opportunity here to put our money where our mouth is and say, okay, we have a bunch of industry graybeards, like, they've been looking for their chance to get it out a different way. Let's do that. So, normally when we would have this conversation, you'd say something like, all right, well, when's the beta, or when's the first playable, or whatever, yardstick we'd want to use. What we're trying to do now is get the content out way, way, way sooner than you would normally expect, sort of warts and all, right? So we've got this idea sort of like embedded in the studio's DNA of, aggressive transparency, come hell or high water. And I think usually when a game studio says that, it means, they follow the CEO around with a camera and put it on YouTube, and then they go silent for 7 years, and that's that. For us, it's note word, you're looking over our shoulder, like whether that's Discord or a release that we do or whatever. So obviously, the playable is going to be a big version of that, right? But where we are now is trying to understand sort of what pieces of like our own internal systems we can carve off to get something out as quickly as possible. Because of the sort of like working methodology this team has, it's very, I'd call it like an atomic design. It's very much, can I walk? Okay, how fast can I walk? Can I run? How quick can I run? How quick can I transition from run to walk? Because that's like, especially in the shooter space, that those tiny millisecond interactions that's where the fun is, right? Like if you're not having fun running and jumping and shooting and vaulting, it doesn't matter if there's a cool Michael Bay set piece at the end of it. You're not going to care. You're not going to play the game. And so the way that we've been building these out are sort of, you could call them like traversal gymnasiums, right? Like, can I run? Can I vault? Can I climb? Does our game have ladders? Which sounds like a silly thing, but it's not, and then you have shooting ranges where that's just, how do the weapon types work? Are there meaningful distinctions between them? How far do we want to dial any one thing, this way, that way, or whatever? And we're sort of parallelizing all of that work together so that when it comes together, you can take a snapshot and say, all right, this is current state of play. Normally you would carve off something like that and throw a ton of art at it and call that a vertical slice, and that would be the thing that goes out. What we're trying to figure out now is the best way to say, with all of the caveats that we can put on this so that the community understands, work in progress, like, this is about a journey, not like a product, like come with us. As soon as we can get comfortable with that'll be the next step for us, right? So that development's happening. I think we're at a point where we can, be talking about sort of the snapshots very soon. We're not going to announce a date yet, but it's, you can kind of see it from here. And in the meantime, the rest of the studio is building up everything around it that's going to need that to function, like, insane backends, any of the marketplace stuff, all of our front end work that we're going to have to do. We've been trying to sort of, encourage people to pick up the IP a little bit through, comics and community engagement on Discord, and just any number of different things that we can put out to sort of, cast as wide a net as we can on all this stuff that we're trying to do, and give people some meaningful snapshot into it, consistently, right?
And just to add, like maybe a tiny bit of flavor to what Colin is saying, because our final product is something that we believe will have consumer creators in the midst of it, that level of transparency that Colin was talking about is a big hypothesis for us about engaging a community of creators by showing how we created the thing, to sort of string along both the levels of complexity and how hard it is to do this thing, but also invite them into the conversation and grow the community of creators by sort of, engaging, not just telling them, but literally engaging them in the process of the creation.
And why, from the outset, so somebody, for example, with the idea you mentioned earlier, somebody whose building is being used the most. In other areas, I imagine that's just like a really cool thing to show off, like, hey, mine's number one, or has had X number of footfall. But what in the context of Shrapnel, what's in it for that creator? What do they get from that?
Yeah, so part of the plan of the system that we're building here, we've put a lot of thought into the economics of the blockchain side of the whole ecosystem, and above and beyond just the sort of fame making that might happen in other games where I have a creation and other people are using it, is a sense of sort of community rewards. And for those of you who that are listening and haven't, we have a shrapnel.com website. We have a white paper available in there where you can go up and read sort of the underlying philosophy that we have in mind for this system. But we're effectively putting together a rewards pool that can pay into the creator ecosystem relative to how much people are playing and seeing and using the things that you're creating. And so when my building is most popular in a map, it's not just fame making, because we do think that that's important, and you can absolutely brag about the number of views that you have of your building, but it's also to some extent like money making, in the sense of the shared part of a reward for people who are actively using and seeing the thing that you made.
I'd say there's like one weird little thing that comes off of that as well. Like, we're often talking about like trying to keep these ecosystems healthy and people's interactions with them healthy. And, anyone that's ever made anything and put it online knows that things can get toxic very, very quickly. We have a lot of like big shared group expertise on the team, and we know, things can get toxic almost immediately. And so one of the levers that's going to be really interesting to experiment with, and, I don't know how this is going to go, because nobody knows how it's going to go. But in a world where, not only does the community reward, best in class work that's being done by the community, if there's also this idea that, well, there's also a financial aspect of that where, if I make better stuff, I do better for myself. Does that, is that a little bit more carrot than stick when it comes to community management, right? Like, is it, do we just make it in your best interest to be a positive player in the space? And so, not trying to over-index too much on that, but it'll certainly be interesting to experience.
Yeah, I think it was what went through my head when I heard about the idea, and how like anything online can get toxic so quickly. But actually, when there is a little bit more gravity to what you're doing, and it's not just, like you said, a fame thing or bragging rights. I would like to think that having a positive impact on that community would only benefit somebody further, and would be a little bit more influenced to being a positive member in the community than maybe in other areas. That brings me on to quite an important question, because I think there's going to be some people out there thinking, why build on the blockchain? What is the point of adding that side of it in? Forgetting the economics aspect for a minute, what made you want to go down that route?
Well, I mean, I'd say, speaking for myself, like, I wake up every single morning and ask, does this benefit Toby the gamer, right? Because if it doesn't, we're dead in the water. There's no reason to do it in the first place. And I think that the simplest explanation here for me is that we're just trying to reduce friction in a process that people go through anyway, right? So the way we describe it is, you should never be going to Reddit to sell your Warcraft mount. That's silly, So I think so if that was it, if that was totally like the end goal, I think that in itself would be a quality of life improvement for some people. But I think if you start to look a little bit down the road, like maybe a few years from now, sort of, where assets might go and where assets might do, the way I describe it is, things need to know what they are outside of where you're viewing them and where they were made. And so, sometimes I hear the question like, well, why isn't this just a game database? It's like, well, what if we weren't in that database anymore? Like we're going to need to find a way to reconcile a little bit. So while of course our goal is this thing needs to be the best that it can, and we always want you to be there and having fun with us and enjoying our content. But should a person choose some other road with their digital items that they own, they can feel empowered to do that. And they don't have to inherently take a loss by engaging with this thing that we're making.
Yeah, and just to say the word that Colin was skirting around, there's a lot of conversation about metaverse going on in the zeitgeist right now, and doubling down on what Colin said, like we don't view ourselves as a metaverse like company with a metaverse aim, but we do absolutely view the underlying technology as something that's going to enable something like that to happen, and we are a firm believer that that direction is the future. And in order to enable that future, the big thing that happens is, if we were with a big publisher You can have game to game interactions, between the titles that you publish. But when you start going from publisher to publisher, then all of a sudden, like every publisher is going to say, yeah, we want a standard and it's our standard. And the other publisher's like, we want a standard and it's our standard. And we just feel like at the end of the day, there are a few things that are just fundamentally common in a lot of games. And that's the thing that you should own as a consumer. And you should own it outside of us as a publisher developer. Literally you can take it and do whatever else you wanted to go do with it, including go take it into a different publisher or game or other ecosystem. And so, there's an ethos that underlies that, which we firmly believe in, which is, don't build for the infinite possibility, build for the game that we are building, but enable it with an underlying technology that affords the future possibility. And once it's proven out, perhaps our studio is one to go build game number 2 that can go leverage that stuff, but it's not a requirement that it be our studio. There's an element of blockchain that enables that sort of thing in the future. I definitely get that same question that Colin talks about, which is like, you could just do this with your own, database and your own ecosystem. But I did want to, there's also a philosophy thing that kind of gets bundled with blockchain. There's just sort of a sense of freedom that people who are avid believers of the blockchain sort of tie into. And when you start drinking from that Kool-Aid a little bit, one of the things that you arrive at is a sort of community that engages more strongly with what's happening. And so on top of just like that sort of versatility of our game assets and the things that we're building and the things that our consumers are building with our tools, is also just a sense of increased engagement, because there is that belief that it is something I actually own and it's not something that somebody else owns. We want to tap that passion into what we're building.
Yeah, and I think there's like also just that opportunity that Aaron was bringing up before. Like, I don't believe the big players in this space will be able to move quickly enough to engage with this when it becomes mainstream and important. And in fact, I think it's sort of, perpendicular to their interests almost, right? Like, if a major publisher chooses to engage with this technology, if that department does well, there's another department over here that's not doing well, or they're feeling threatened, or they're feeling freaked out. And so, I think that people are going to have to be forced to reconcile with digital ownership, whether they like to or not. And I would sort of expect sort of an industry scramble, maybe 2 years from now, saying like, oh God, we need a part of this. We need to get into this. We don't have confidence in that approach. And we think it really does need to be built up from the ground up. I think if you then marry that with the idea that everyone right now is just sort of suffering from IP fatigue, it's like, oh, I'm going to go play Iron Man 15 or whatever. They just want something new and a different kind of process and a different kind of game experience. And so it really does feel like all of these separate threads are kind of coming together at a very, very specific moment in time. And the feeling in the studio is just, wow, we might have actually just bullseyed this thing. Like, we weren't a couple of years too early. We weren't a couple of years too late. We are in a point to really have a hand on the rudder and, be an active industry participant into building this thing into a shape that could help the most people the most quickly.
I think from definitely when I spoke to you last time, but even more so on this podcast now, I think what is so obvious is that you have genuinely set about this mission with all the right goals. It seems bananas that somebody would go and create a game and weren't thinking about the person sat in the seat on the other side of the screen. But you have genuinely thought about every avenue and every aspect of what it is to be someone sat on the other side of the screen, engaging in the game. You've thought about every aspect and you've kept that in mind the whole way through, even to where you are now. I think it's quite. I'm not even a gamer. I don't get involved too much in that space, and I think it's really your passion's really obvious, the drive is there, it's empowering. I think that anyone listening, whether they're an engineer or whether they're a gamer, they're like, I need to know about this. This is really cool. I want to know, you touched on it a little bit. So the feeling in the studio is like, you might have just hit the bullseye with this. Well, who's in the studio? What's the team like?
Yeah, I mean, the amazing thing is that we've managed to sort of keep that very tight core ethic that we had when we were 8 people all the way up to, what are we now, Aaron, like 45? We have been hyper selective, I guess you could say, in who we want to bring in. You know, as everyone knows, hiring is really tricky right now. So most of our hires are, you know, from the Rolodex, right? Like people that we've shipped things with before, that we've enjoyed working with, and that's allowed us to bring together a pretty impressive bench. You know, like when you walk through the hall, it's like, oh, Call of Duty, Halo, BioShock. There's another Call of Duty. Like it's an impressive group of people that, you know, not only are we confident can build this thing out, they're also passionate about this weird new, you know, if I squint my eyes at it, what is it? Technology, right? And I think everyone has an idea of what that could ultimately lead to for them, or like what, you know, a next stage and, like, you know, this whole game space is going to look like. But just the fact that everybody can also like work together and, you know, bring that sort of traditional game diligence to that it's just a really cool confluence of events coming together. I don't know, in terms of growth, what do you got, Aaron?
Well, I mean, I think you said one of the key things about growth. I just wanted to dip back into that sort of veteran leadership side of things just for a moment and say, you know, I would definitely encourage folks to check out Shrapnel.com. We have bios of all of our leaders up there. And for some of the folks that are net new to the studio and net new to our networks, you know, we really do focus on a few key elements of the office culture as equivalent to skill and wisdom that people are bringing in to keep that entrepreneurial spirit, to keep a product first focus, to think about the consumer, you know, first and foremost. And some of our newest hires that we've brought in come with you know, a crazy amount of even like on the blockchain side, a crazy amount of experience on the blockchain. Like you know, when blockchain is only like in the forefront of folks' minds for a decade, and you get people who have like 6+ years of blockchain experience, you know, you're dipping into some of the you know, quote unquote forefathers of the system, and it's those folks who I think they do contain that passion for wanting to not just create a product, but to create an ecosystem that cultivates healthy usage of what's happening on the other side. Like, so I highlight that. Yes, we just crossed 45 folks in the studio, and we're growing. You know, in order to build a product of this size. When you compare to big games publishers and other AAA studios, like ultimately you're talking about team sizes that can get like hundreds of folks. And you know, when we think about the office culture and what we want to do here, we really are focused on sort of teasing apart the people who need to be a core part of the team for years to come, and the people who help us to deliver by adding their strength to specific deliverables. And the former are the group that we're focused on hiring full time and bringing into the studio because, you know, as an ethos, we want to make sure that we're committing to somebody for 5+ years. Like it's not just a temporary stop, a next project. It's, you know, it's a part of creating like future ecosystems and future products and keeping this thing healthy and alive. And for the latter group of people who are there to like really make this thing shine, we're really going to be dipping into the maturing games ecosystem that's out there in terms of outsourcing capacity, both, you know, in particular in terms of art, but also in terms of engineering. Like, there is a growing workforce of engineers who, like, their passion is actually less about one product and the lifetime of that product and more about new and interesting challenges. And that's, you know, one of the things that huge corporations like Meta or Amazon or Google and some of the folks that are in the neighborhood, like they have that capacity to bring somebody in and have like an infinite variety of challenges. And Shrapnel, is yet one product. But when we partner with somebody who can help Shrapnel deliver, but then also go help another company go deliver their game, they sort of enable those people who are interested in like the diversity of projects that they're going to go do to deliver, and to me that creates a very healthy ecosystem on the employee side of the fence, that we're not bringing folks in, hiring them, surging to a large degree, and then laying off a whole bunch of people at the end of the day because like we don't have that next thing for them to go do, and then that person has to go hunt for the next thing, the next job that's going to bring in money for their family. And instead, like there have been a handful of scenarios where we've identified that kind of talent, and instead of trying to bring them in-house and only use them for one product, we actually direct them into a partner that we think will help them long-term have a steady amount of employment and a diversity of products, and then working with them through that partner in order to deliver the thing that we want to go do.
Yeah, I think like we just have so much stuff going on too that even if you come in, there's a lot of room for like really interesting like horizontal experimentation. So like we would have just like a back end engineer come through and just say like, well, my kid loves games. I've always loved games. I've kind of tinkered with them, but I've never really thought of that before. And it's like, well, walk across the hall. Like there's so much of this that we could do. Like there's always another pail of water to scoop out of the boat. So any and all comers. And I think just generally speaking, kind of going back to that idea of, maybe the games ecosystem having this perception of being, in an unhealthy place. I think what we'd really like to do is like allow Shrapnel to have a reputation as a place where people can go to grow and like one, get into the game industry, but two, find that thing that they excel at, because we have, so many different webs going in so many different directions. And I think, where we are in Seattle, like it's very much a target rich environment here. Like, with a lot of like, schools that go into games and a lot of like just support around it. I think there's a way to make a really interesting impact just by, trying to be respectful of people, giving them opportunities, and then giving them, a chance to run with them a little bit.
I think I'm going to almost repeat what I said earlier, but not only are you keeping the person on the other end of the product at mind at all times, I think hats off for the ethics when it comes to people you're bringing into the team. Clearly, you've built an incredible team in-house who are doing a fantastic job and will continue to do so. But that aspect of using a partner, it's not many companies are prepared to do that. So it's actually really refreshing to hear. And I think to anyone listening who thinks it's a cool place to work, you've ticked a huge ethics, morals of the company box there. One of my last questions is, you've both worked at big names in the industry. I'm sure you've like had a hand in ones that maybe aren't on your LinkedIn. What is it? Why would somebody join Shrapnel over those big games? You've mentioned some of the guys you've got on the team at the minute, Call of Duty, Halo. Like, why have those people chosen to come and work for you over the big names?
I mean, speaking for myself, like it goes back to that process and ethic thing, right? So I think if you squint your eyes at Shrapnel and said like, nope, we were making cabinets. That's what the studio does. We want to make cabinets the best way that we can with the best people that we can. And, tease out the best way to do it and not just rely on, sort of like a blind industry expertise, right? So when we make this thing, the chance to succeed because we succeeded or fail because we failed is really attractive for a lot of people in this space. I think when you're in some of those larger buildings, sometimes it can become a little numbing, like you're making a game for someone else with someone else's money, and then you're going to clock out at 5 o'clock. I think with this, it's not only that cool sense of ownership and that cool sense of success that you're going to get with it, but just, knowing that we got there in, the most efficient, quickest, but most respectful way possible, right? Like you'll never read on a Kotaku article that says, oh, there was a slave march at Shrapnel and everyone was crunching for 8 months at a time. Just building a studio where that does not happen in and of itself is enough for us to go off and try to do this.
Yeah, and the only thing that I would add to that, Colin, is I definitely think about it in two parts. Like, there's the people. So, like, speaking of the culture of the office and how strongly and convicted we are internally to hiring and maintaining that culture and reinforcing it on a daily basis and living and breathing it. As previously said, like there's sort of a network effect. As big as the games industry is, it's also small. And for anybody who we've hired who we haven't directly worked with, we've worked with a mutual person, and it can confirm that the culture is to our core. It's not something that we're just talking about. So like there's the people part, then there's the product part, and I think one of the super big draws is that level of, is this the thing that's going to make blockchain relevant in games? And I want to be a part of like proving that there's something fundamentally true and fundamentally good about that. Like there's that sort of like intellectual challenge part that is absolutely bringing this group of humans together, and it's the marriage of those two things together.
I think we've probably convinced people who are listening that at the very least they need to go and check out you guys. But I always like to ask the audience listening, if they can only take one thing away from this podcast, what would you like them to take?
Go to shrapnel.com and there's a link to our Discord, and become a part of not just a fan community, but an engaged creator community that can help make this thing the thing that you would like it to be.
I mean, for me, I'm hoping that this just maybe raises some curiosity in some people around how the game making process, like how it happens, like how the sausage gets made. I think, right now we're talking about a product that won't be a product for a while. So the thing that we're trying to show people and trying to give to people really is the process, and it's these conversations and how we're making decisions and how that ultimately goes into that final thing. And so if anyone's ever been curious about it, come hang out with us, come hit the Discord, come listen to some of the interviews, and tell your buddies, and come be a part of this insane community that we're trying to make.
Brilliant. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming on. This has been really interesting. When we put this on, and for those who are listening now, we're going to put the website on the link. We'll link to any of the things that we've mentioned in the podcast too. Plus anything else that you guys want me to direct people to when we get off the call. But this has been brilliant. I'm absolutely hope that if you have any questions, follow what they've said, website, Discord, at the very least, drop them a message on LinkedIn. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Rosie.
Thank you, Rosie.